Well, I came from a family where I had 5 siblings, so there were 6 of us. And I was the youngest girl, and there were 4 girls. And I think that I needed something to own something to own for myself, because I was constantly sharing everything. And one day at school, I was caught chewing bubble gum, and the teacher said to me, "You have to write an essay." And I wanted 3 pages long. And I was in the 4th grade, and I remember writing that essay. And at the end of it, I mean, it's hard to write about bubblegum for 3 pages. And at the end of it, I wrote, "I am a human being, so I cannot promise you that I will never do it again." So based on that, she said to me, "You are going to be a writer, young lady." And she really was very impressed with all the things I had to say about bubblegum, which I can't remember any of them today. So then I went in the 5th grade. It was the same way. I won a talent show for a children's play that I wrote called The Magic Hat. So, and I noticed that I really felt very special every time I wrote. And there was a special feeling. So it was something I owned completely for myself. And that's really, I think, I didn't really write anything until I was about 18 years old. And I took a class with the New School of Social Research in New York City. I always remember uh, the instructor. His name was Hayes Jacobs, well gone now. But he was, so I can talk about him if I choose. He, I wrote my first short story in that class, and I was 18 only. But he had taken my story and put it up in front of the classroom with red marks all over it, saying, and it all had to do with grammar. It all had to do with the fact that I had run-on sentences, which I still struggle with. And I didn't indent properly on the page. And he really made me feel terrible, because he never once mentioned the content of the work. So I went home, and I never wrote again, like for 20 years.
20 years?
Yeah. All I did was read about writing. I read everything I could possibly read. I read every book that was published. I remember I got a subscription to Coda, which is now called Poets and Writers. It was called Coda at the time. And I waited every month for that magazine to come to read about certain things about writing. Then one day, when I was about 37 years old, I heard that John Gardner, who was a legendary teacher of writing, he was the mentor for Raymond Carver, the mentor for Thomas Wolfe. There's so many writers that he really encouraged and helped. I heard that he was going to be at Hofstra University in Long Island, where I was living at the time. So I went to listen to him, and it was a very small group of people, maybe 10, 12 people there only at the college. And he spoke about writing and about getting published. And I had the chutzpah, they say in Yiddish, to walk up to him at the end of his talk and asked him, how does a writer, how did I put it? How does a writer really compromise his work when it comes to commercial fiction and literary fiction? How how do you compromise in order to be published? Because I know that they only want, I had sent something out to Redbook one time, and they wrote me that my work was too brainy, the word they used was brainy, and I can't remember what else she did. Well, it was a struggle because it wasn't writing plot-driven stories. Anyway, he said, well, you send me what you're doing. Send me 2 stories and I'll look at it for you. And with that, I ran home and I started to type up 2 stories that were just brewing inside of me. And I was so afraid he was going to forget that he said that to me. So I rushed through that whole week. And I did have 2 small children at home, so it was difficult. And I sent them off to him. And 6 months later, I got a letter from him, and that happened to be 2 months before he was killed in his motorcycle accident. But the letter said that he thought my writing was brilliant. And just those words is all I needed. And so in the end, I could say that he really was the one who got me to write.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah,
That's legendary.
yeah. So, writing commercial fiction, you have more of a chance to publish. But you have to write what you want to write. You can't write for the public. I mean, there are people that do, and they can, maybe because they're not the kind of writer that I am. There are many kinds of writers. So,
Now you spent several decades publishing stories, poems in some pretty prestigious publications too. How did that whole process work? And
well, my first short story, actually, one of the stories that I sent to John Gardner was um, around, I'd say 40 times it was out. 40 times it was
40
rejected.
submissions
40
rejected.
submissions rejected. And one day decided, oh, I'm going to send it to Playgirl magazine.
Wow.
Because I saw that Playgirl magazine, which was a commercial magazine, was publishing fiction. And lo and behold, I got a phone call from California one night, and they said, we love your story. We'd love to publish it. Will $400 be enough? I said,
That's great.
I
So
said, how much? She said, $400. I said, I'll take it,
I'll
no
take
problem.
it.
Uh,
So
and
that's
that,
the first money you ever made from writing.
right.
Wow,
And the
amazing.
first story I ever had
And the
published.
first story published in the wow.
Mhm.
Oh,
And then from there, I built some confidence, and I was able to send more things out without feeling so rejected. And I got a few stories that I say I was happy that I published. Um, yeah.
how did the poetry work in there at the same time?
Well, I think poetry is my first love, really. And poetry is something that comes with inspiration. And in some of the stories is that you have to sit down when you write a story and just work. You can't, if you wait for inspiration, you're never going to get it done. But in poetry, it's always one line or one word that makes me think of, wow, I have to write about that. I have to write something. So in poetry, I've got a bunch of poems in my drawer that I haven't sent out. And some of them are maybe 40 years old. I always feel they're not good enough. So I'm still, maybe one day I'll put some together.
Publish a collection.
Yeah. Mhm.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, some writers don't experiment with other forms and genres. And some just stick to poetry, some just stick to fiction. Maybe they should, maybe that's the way it should be, but for them, that's what works for them. But
I remember seeing in one of I went to many conferences, writing conferences and lectures, and I remember seeing James Dickey, and he wrote his most famous book was Deliverance. He was incredible. He was a bear of a man. He was so big, and he had this southern drawl, which was incredible. He's very deep voice, and I remember him saying that he had 5 different typewriters. One was for novels, one was for short stories, one was for poetries, one was for essays, one, I don't know what the other one was for. I think it was 5, maybe it was 4. And that he talked mostly about the writer's confidence, self-confidence, and how important it was, and following your own voice and never ever giving up on it. So that was very, very good for me to hear because it made me feel that, yeah, he's right. Why should I give up on my own voice? Once you have a lot of writers don't have their own voice. They're imitating, or they're mostly plot driven genre fiction. So um, I'm trying to remember what he said.
well, I love that with the different typewriters. It's like you're wearing a different hat
Yeah,
for
and that's what he
and that's
did.
how I feel with my writing.
Oh, see, there you
Yeah.
go.
I get
Yeah.
into I become a different person. I even call myself different names.
Well, I like that.
It's
That's
just
fun.
because it's just a different part of me. It's totally different part. So
You're right. You're absolutely right. Uh, I'm thinking of getting another computer.
they could get expensive.
I know. Um, what was I going to say then? So, yeah, I enjoy writing. The only thing I've written some nonfiction, and I had two things published in New York Times, but um, I don't enjoy writing nonfiction. It's not challenging enough for me, anyway. I don't have that way of thinking either. So,
Oh, good. You stick with the fiction and the poetry.
yeah.
At what point did the novel come in? We're going to talk about the novel, Miriam Polli's novel, In a Vertigo of Silence.
Well, that novel started with a short story. It was a short story about Emily, who was the main protagonist, and with her friend Wanda. And it was a short story, and I was in a writers group, and they all said, "My God, you have a novel there. You have a novel there." So
Wow.
I didn't go by what they said, but I knew they were right because I kept thinking about this character. So I wrote that novel, and with between my children and working, it took me almost 20 years to finish that novel.
20 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was influenced by my first husband. His family was Polish, and his grandmother was Polish who didn't speak any English. And I loved the family. I was very influenced by them. And so I made them Polish characters. And I really enjoyed parts of it. Her husband, two of her husbands died in the coal mines. So I remember thinking, so the only research I had to do for that book was about Pennsylvania and the coal mines. I did some research on that too, because in the book, someone dies in the coal mine. But it took me almost 20 years to write that.
Wow, wow. That's it. Have you heard from any Polish people about the book? Any Polish readers?
No, but I've got some reviews on Amazon and on a few different sites where some of the names look Polish. But there's nothing, it's not a Polish story, really. It's just that the family happened to be Polish. But and it seems that when the Poles first came to this country, a lot of them went into the coal mines.
That was some tough work, right?
Yeah, yeah, very, very difficult. And let's see.
Well, this book is a saga of women's lives mostly, right? It's focused around the women in different eras, different places.
Right.
Is there one particular woman that you relate with and you identify most strongly with?
Yeah, I think I do with all of them.
Is that why you have it? So there's so
I
many.
think I do with all of them. I think that's why the book is successful.
Mhm.
And someone had wrote on the back of the book something about Porter Shreve. I think he wrote on the back of the book, which I don't have a copy with me now. Something about it being empathetic towards all the characters, which, I was in the story. The woman, as a mother, I never had a grandmother, but there's a grandmother in that book. But she was really my mother. In order for me to write it, I thought of my mother. But the main character, Emily, was the one I had the hardest time with. Trying to write her because my life was so different than hers. There's the thing that I related to, of course, is the emotional content. And that's what makes the book successful.
Yeah, I have it here. It's her understanding of her characters, their impulses, the forces that drive their actions and inaction that makes this a powerful, memorable book. Porter Shreve.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so I was so happy. And when I finished that, I said, I'm never going to write another novel.
Did it well, it took you 20 years, so what was the hardest part about it? Did it require a lot of research? Did it require a lot of
No,
not a lot of research for that?
no research. It was just a matter of the research was only on the coal mines, which was very slight, very little.
Okay.
Uh, what it required was, one chapter after the next. Where do I go from here?
Hmm.
It's my next chapter. What do I do? It's like any novel, you're not sure. It's a long road. And I experienced that again with my second novel, which I've just completed. So
So how long did the second one take you? The second one was a lot more research, right? We'll talk about that at a later date, but
yeah, a lot of research because it was a historical novel
mhm.
based on something that happened in history in the United States in Boston, not in Boston, in Massachusetts, back in the 1920s. So that took me a lot of research. But the more I researched, the more excited I got about the book. about the writing. And that took me 8 years, 7, 8 years to write. I thought it was going to be a lot quicker because I felt I wasn't emotionally invested, but that is such nonsense because I was totally emotionally invested in the book. You know, what's his name? Dr. Rowe, E.L. Dr. Rowe, the novelist. He said that a novelist, I'll remember in a minute. This is what happens when you interview older people.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, two very different books, very different approaches, different perspective.
Right, this is historical fiction, the one I finished.
Mhm.
And so is Birds of Passage. But the thing is, it does have a lot, and I wrote this book because I grew up with my father and my mother talking about these people, being Italian American, and they were Italian immigrants.
Characters are Italian in the new
Yeah,
book.
yeah, it's an Italian background. Yeah. So yeah.
So is that what sparked the new book?
Well, my father was so passionate about it that there was some injustice done to them, to these people, to Italian immigrants, that he was so passionate about it. He spoke about it a lot. And he was an anarchist in his own way. Not he was never active in anything, but his ideas were that way. And he had he was a very, very strong and unique man in his own way. Um, I'm still trying to think of what E.L.
Of that quote, yeah.
Yes,
Well,
it's an important quote.
what
Ah,
are the writers? Well, we'll think about if that comes
all
back
right.
to you.
Yeah.
What you read a lot too, still, right?
Oh, you have to read if you want to be a
You
writer.
have to, right? It's a must. What other writers influenced you along the way? Are there early ones? Are there more recent ones?
Well, when I was a young girl, a young woman, I read a short story writer by the name of Harold Brodkey. Harold Brodkey was a New York writer who lived in Manhattan. He wrote short stories, not very small. He doesn't have a lot of work. He's gone now. He passed away. But he had written a short story called My Father, a Light in My Arms, something to that effect. And I read this short story that just blew me away. And I said, my God, no one will ever be able to write about their fathers again. I mean, this was incredible. And I just said, look what writing can do. And he influenced me tremendously. I tried to read everything he ever wrote, but I was never affected by anything else that he wrote, but that one story. Um, and oh, there were so many writers that I really loved. There's just too many to think about now.
When you started writing, did you start on a typewriter, the old fashioned way? Was it a typewriter?
Oh,
Was it
I was using a pencil and paper,
pencil?
pencil and paper. And when I started with the typewriter, you had to use carbon paper. And when you made a mistake, oh God, you had to go back and change 2 copies. And you could never line it up properly again. So it was always a problem. So when the computer came along, actually it was word processing first and then the computer. So the word processing really helped a lot. Yeah, I always, especially poems, I always have to write with a pencil when I'm writing a poem. But now I'm to the point where I can actually type into the computer. Unless I get to a point where I have to say something which is deeply emotional, something that I have to pick up the pen and try to write it out on paper first.
I wonder about the writers of the future, if they'll still be using pens and pencils the way we do.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, most likely they will, right?
Hopefully. I think it's a different experience when you're putting that pen or pencil to the paper. It's a physical experience that just doesn't match with the computer.
Yep. Oh, I just remembered. See, it does happen. E.L. Doctorow
Oh,
said
okay.
that history will tell you what happened, but a novelist will tell you what it felt like.
That's nice. Yeah.
So that is what influenced my writing of the last book that I wrote, Birds of Passage.
Wow.
I went with that line and I kept thinking about it and I kept remembering what he said. So I think it's a very effective because of that. And if you take a character and you put them in a situation and you can actually feel what they're going through, that's what fiction is about, really.
Would you say that's the job of the writer?
I do. I think it's based on truth. I think truth in writing, as cheesy as it sounds, is the main thing in writing. What it does, it tells the truth about something
Reveals.
and reveals, and it's very important. Right.
Nice.
Mm. I'm so happy I remembered E.L.
That's
Doctorow.
good. I know. I'm glad we got that in there. That's
Mm.
what books are currently on your nightstand?
Oh, I see you read the New York Times too. Um, believe it or not, I am currently rereading The Stranger.
Wow.
Oh, uh, it's probably the classic novel of a sociopath that I've ever seen. I just finished reading Leaving by Roxana Robinson, which is her newest novel. I'm not allowed, I don't want to say anything. So I've got Gabriel Garcia Marquez's newest novel, Until August. I've got that there, which I heard that his children published against his will. He's gone now, and they published it, put it out. Botticelli's Secret, which by Joseph Luzzi. I love stories about artists. I love to read them. And O. Henry's best short stories. And I probably have about 20 other books in a basket below that are waiting to be read. And I promised myself I wasn't going to buy any more books until I finished those. That's a whole.
Stacks and stacks of books. Books
Yep.
behind you as well.
Yeah.
Quite a nice looking library.
Oh yeah, I've got plenty. Yeah. You can see it. Um, yeah, so let's see, do we have time yet? No, I think that's it,
We're
right?
almost out. What are you working on now? You got the second novel is finished,
Yes, it's finished.
and
I'm trying to get it published now.
okay, so So I think that would be a great opportunity to have you back and just talk about that book when it's
Sure,
published.
sure, I would love to do that. Let's hope it gets published.
It will, it will.
And it's one of few, well, it's been shortlisted and
Okay,
longlisted, so I'm hoping that more will come of it.
that's exciting.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for having me, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Words of wisdom here. Thank
Yeah,
you for taking the time to
right.
tell us about your life and your writing career. Everybody can grab this book now. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, In a Vertigo of Silence.